Okay, so oh my goodness, we are so fortunate to have Kieva back with us today. If you were able to attend her workshop this past fall, it was this wonderful introduction, review of the research, and exemplars of the application of Gestalt language processing, strategies to support Gestalt language processing for our kiddos who are using augmentative alternative communication. And she very graciously agreed to come back today and talk with everybody, see how everybody's doing, respond to some questions, engage in some problem solving. So yay, thanks Kieva for being here. I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over to you.
My pleasure. Thanks for coming back. And I'm thrilled to see how many of you are signing on for this workshop today. It always makes me excited when I see other providers so excited to learn about this topic. So today, as Chris mentioned, I presented previously on this topic a couple of times, and the purpose of today's presentation is really to engage in more direct dialogue with all of you who are attending to see how things went the past few months using some of those strategies and applying everything that you've learned so far. So for today's workshop, it's really going to be, there's going to be a heavy focus on conversation together as a group, learning from each other as a whole cohort, and just collaborating openly with one another. A little bit about me. My name is Kieva D'Angelo. I'm the owner of Kieva Speech Therapy in Parker, Colorado. I'm a speech language pathologist, but I'm also a assistive technology consultant for Tech for Types program, which is with the early intervention program. I started, for those of you who I haven't met you yet or haven't heard from me yet, I started my learning journey on this topic back in 2016 when I first started working at the Colorado School for the Blind. And one thing we know about children who grow up with visual impairment is echolalia is a very important part of their language journey. And I happened to work with a lot of Gestalt language processors and also Gestalt language processors who needed AAC. And when I was a brand new SLP in 2016, I didn't necessarily have any graduate coursework specific to delayed echolalia and Gestalt language processing and what all of that meant. And so I really kind of had to dive in, learn on the go, read as much as I possibly could about this topic. And now, through my practice, I'm now in my own practice, and I work pretty much exclusively with AAC users. So about 90% of my caseload are AAC users, and of those AAC users, 26% are also Gestalt language processors. One thing I do have down here in all caps is that I am always learning as well. I love that I get to present on this topic because it's something I'm really passionate about. But I know that even after today's webinar, I'm probably going to be learning some really cool things from you guys too. So what you can expect today, again, this webinar is really kind of like a follow-up / check-in session for those who attended past workshops. But if you didn't attend previous trainings, no worries. I'm so happy to have you here. I'm definitely going to be doing a quick review / recap of those past trainings before we do open up the floor for collaboration. But I think it's great, even if you didn't attend, even if this is a brand new topic, I think you'll be able to learn a lot just from hearing some of your colleagues here sharing about their experiences so far. And if you are looking for more of an in-depth training, I will be presenting at CATE 2024 this summer, and it will be a 4-hour workshop this time, divided between the 2 days of that CATE conference. And so that's something, if you're interested in learning more about this topic in more depth, you can register for CATE. We won't have enough time during this 1-hour workshop to dive into all of the content that we've covered the past few months or so. But again, I hope you're able to learn with us today and still collaborate with us. So here's a quick recap. For those of you who haven't attended previous sessions, I wanted to just do a quick review. I know there's a lot of you guys here. So past workshops, we've talked quite a bit about how there are those two very valid language processing styles, analytic language processing and Gestalt language processing, which we know through old research, but really strong research. It's definitely still a high area of research need, but one thing that we know is that these two language processing styles do exist, and they look very different from each other. So with analytic language processing, this is what we read a lot about in our textbooks, and it's what we learn about in grad school. It's bottom-up language development, where a child learns single words at a time, and they begin to piece those words together to get to phrases and then sentences using syntax and self-generated grammar. And then for Gestalt language processing, it's the exact opposite. So it's top-down processing, where a child first learns language through the use of whole language chunks, or quote unquote scripts, which I don't really like the term scripts because we know Gestalts are so much more than that. There's a lot of meaning to them. But they learn with these whole chunks, these whole phrases, and then over time, they learn that those whole phrases, it's not just one unit of meaning, it can be spliced down and broken down into individual words. And from there, they then start to discover that they can free those words from those scripts and gestalts to get to self-generated sentences with grammar and syntax. Gestalt language processing, in short, if you're working with someone who has delayed echolalia, so they are able to remember and echo things that they have heard, whether that's from songs or TV shows or from their communication partners, and they come up every now and then, maybe a day later, weeks later, months later, however that looks. If you have someone who's using delayed echolalia, that is Gestalt language processing is essentially delayed echolalia when that delayed echolalia has a communicative function. And so when we think about, that previous slide, I had detailed, top down versus bottom up. We want to think about Gestalt language processing as a journey for developing language in a way that's different than what we know about analytic language processing. And it's really, as Mark Blanc says, it's that journey from echolalia to eventually self-generated language with the syntax. And that is identified as natural language acquisition, which basically is this framework for thinking about that development as a Gestalt language processor that was theorized by Marge Blanc. So she used the research before her, and then she spent about 15 years conducting her own longitudinal research on her own Gestalt language processing clients, through which she found consistent patterns for how their language evolved and progressed over time. And she details that as these stages of natural language acquisition. And she has detailed it as well in her book, which I'll share with you, which is a must read if you haven't been able to check it out yet. And she also has it detailed here in this handout. I'll make sure that you all get copies of this PowerPoint slide with all these hyperlinks. But essentially, natural language acquisition is described as 6 different stages, stage 1 through 6. Stage 1 being a child is using delayed echolalia, like a whole phrase, a whole chunk, as one unit of meaning for them. They don't yet understand that those words can be freed from that chunk and recombined in novel ways. And then all the way through, stage 2, which is they slowly start to splice down those whole chunks and rearrange them together. Then stage 3, where you get a lot more single words and 2-word combinations. And then stage 4, which is beginning grammar. And then stage 5 is slightly more advanced. And then stage 6 being all of that grammar and syntax is there. And just a quick review of what Gestalts can look like and sound like. Regardless if your child or person is using AAC or not, typically Gestalts are really rich with prosody and intonation. Gestalt language processors are more drawn to those super segmentals of speech rather than the actual content or distinct words. So they're listening at things like the rate and your pitch and how you're playing with your voice while you're using those language chunks. We had talked about how it is the use of delayed echolalia for that communicative purpose, that function. They are usually whole phrases and sentences, but they can also be single words. For example, a lot of my Gestalt language processors have a lot of single words for exclamations like crash or boom, 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 because there's so much prosody in tone wrapped up in those words and as a part of that experience. Usually, when we think about Gestalts, there's a much deeper meaning that relates to an experience or a feeling that relates so strongly with episodic memory that it just really sticks and resonates with that individual, and the language from that moment really sticks with them too. So for example, I've spoken a lot about my client first initial K, where one of her single words Gestalts was safe. Because her family watched a lot of baseball, and that was something that popped up quite a bit, and that was something that was really exciting and powerful for her. So then when she goes to her sister's cheerleading practice and the cheerleaders tumble to the mat, she jumps up and she exclaims safe with a gesture. Or if I walked into her home and I accidentally dropped the toy, she would exclaim safe. For her, that single word Gestalt was a way to comment about that experience of something falling or dropping down. So there was a little bit of detective work for that Gestalt. We couldn't take it at face value. And again, I mentioned here at the bottom, Gestalts, you might also hear them referred to as script or scripting, but the difference between scripting is that these Gestalts are being used with meaning for communication. It's so much more than just like scripting through a song in someone's head. Like there's a communicative purpose behind it. And so as a whole, that's what Gestalt language processing looks like in speaking individuals. Now, when we look at individuals who are non-speaking or minimally speaking, you might notice that the child is able to hum along to a tune, use the prosody, but they don't yet have the distinct words for it. You might notice that they use a lot of jargon or their speech is unintelligible, but you can tell that there's so much intent with what they are saying and sharing with you because you're listening to that intonation and the prosody. You might notice in your non-speaking individuals that that they are studying video clips and songs and movies or TV shows or storybooks very closely. They might even rewind and replay certain parts of it over and over again or ask for you to help them with that. They might have big or excited reactions for very specific parts of TV shows, songs, or books. Something about that experience and the language that goes with it is just really motivating and inspiring for them. You might notice that maybe the child that you're working with is seemingly making minimal progress despite well-researched, well-regarded strategies for AAC and language. You might notice quote unquote scripting or whole phrase usage over and over again on AAC. And that's something I've seen with a lot of my hyperlexic Gestalt language processors. You might notice that that maybe they have learned a single word on the device, but it feels very rote or prompt dependent. It's not being able to be combined with other words, and it feels relatively inflexible, like very bound by prompts or context specific. And just to recap some implementation do's and don'ts that we've covered in previous workshops together. Things that we do want to do is to speak in or model the use of Gestalt language as your own communication when you're working with these clients. What we don't want to do is we don't want to teach or bombard or force Gestalts though. So we want to model Gestalts, but we never want it to feel unnatural or forced, like it's going to be a taught phrase that is going to get stuck. The whole point of modeling and using Gestalts, including the Gestalts of your client, is to teach and validate that language processing style and to be able to expand from there. It's not that we want them to memorize these very scripted, we don't want them to borrow our very scripted, forced language. If it's not sticking, it's not going to stick, and that's okay. We keep wanting to, you just want to keep cycling in natural language and Gestalts that also fit your clients' inspirations and their enthusiasms, like what's important to them. I've seen things happen where sometimes it's well-intentioned that we're modeling these Gestalts, but they end up not being naturally acquired by the Gestalt language processor and instead turns into more of like a forced script that was bombardedly taught. You do want to focus on redundancy, which is modeling these self-chosen Gestalts across a wide range of contexts. And it should feel natural and organic. And again, what we don't want to do is overdo it. So, that doesn't mean model a Gestalt or use it 50 times or even 10 times for that matter in a single visit. You don't want it to be forced or heavily taught. We do want to add and program in our clients' self-chosen Gestalts onto their device. While also remembering, that their device is a very personal part of their voice. And so we do want to put much intention and foresight into this process. What we don't want to do is we don't want to just add Gestalts into a device that are cookie cutter for all the Gestalt language processors in the class. None of my clients' devices look the same. The other thing we want to keep in mind when we're adding Gestalts onto a device is we never want to interfere with the original integrity of the language organization. We can add to the device and the language layout, but we don't ever want to, for example, on the main home page, we never want to reprogram all those to be in the form of a Gestalt. It's just very cookie cutter, and it's not necessarily the language that they might be craving. It's not naturally acquired, I guess you could say. And we also need to keep in mind that as a Gestalt language processor continues to develop in this journey towards self-generated language, they're going to need access to those single mitigated words. And we don't want to just reprogram over the top of them because they will need them and cycle them in even with their Gestalts. We also want to be very intentional and think about using strategies that are known to support, based on Marge Blanc's work, known to support language development in those different stages of natural language acquisition. We don't want to use too much analytic language processing strategies like asking questions, because we know that happens much later for Gestalt language processors, or doing any kind of correcting and expansion of their sentences, the use of sentence strips. Something else we want to do is, again, we spoke about it already, but we do want to look for that underlying meaning of a Gestalt. And we don't want to take Gestalts literally or at face value. Usually there's a deeper meaning that we have to explore. We want to model and recognize Gestalts through a lens of total communication. So that can include body language, like how they're using body language, low tech, mid tech, and high tech AAC, rather than just focus on like the high tech AAC, for example. We also want to validate any of the quote unquote scripting that we see, we want to validate and honor it as communication. And whether that means if we don't quite know what the meaning of a Gestalt is, we might want to just recast it back to them and smile and acknowledge that we've heard them and that we're listening. But one thing that we don't want to do is we don't want to assume that all scripting is a Gestalt. A lot of my Gestalt language processors use a mix of immediate echolalia and delayed echolalia, but their functions for using delayed echolalia vary tremendously. A lot of my kids use delayed echolalia for that function of communication, but they might also use delayed echolalia for self-soothing and sensory regulation. And so it's important to remember that not every single quote unquote script that you might hear is a Gestalt with that communicative purpose. And so that was a quick little recap. Now I really want to open up the floor for all of you for open collaboration. The next slide that I have has a list of different questions that I'd love to just kind of go through. And I think what I might do, and Chris, you let me know if you have a better idea, but I think I might stop my screen share and see if I can look for that little raise hand emoji on the screen and call on people that way. What do you think?
Sure. Let's give it a try.
Let's do that. Let me go ahead and stop my share. And let me pull up my window here. All right, there you guys are. And let me see if I can make it gallery view so I can make sure I see all of you. Wow, 3 pages. There's a lot of you guys here. Chris, I might need to rely on you or Brenda to help me make sure I don't miss any of those raised hands. But yeah, for those of you who aren't familiar with that feature, I think if you click on those 3 buttons, oh, where is it? Let's see. Or is it reactions? Yes. If you hit reactions down at the bottom bar and you click that little raise hand icon, you can click that raise hand button there. I'll know that you have a question or something you want to share. My first question for you guys is, having gone through some previous trainings, whether or not it was for me or other people, what are some things that you tried or did differently in this time applying what you've learned? And I see Britt Jansen. You're welcome to unmute yourself.
Hi. I had a question for you actually that I've been thinking about for quite a while. I took the Meaningful Speech course. I took your course in the fall. And you kind of just addressed this, but we have several students who do script much longer things from TV shows. And it appears to be very self-soothing. But when we talk about redirecting, because if we think it's a Gestalt, we try to acknowledge and, figure out the intervention that way. But if we think it's self-soothing and it's not communicative, how would you redirect in that moment, or what would you recommend? And just for context, these scripts can be up to like 5 minutes long. And to their type, one student in particular types it all on her SGD. So she types out the whole script. She's very smart.
Got it. No, that's a good thought. I like that you're thinking about that. I'm curious, have you guys done any like mapping of her use of echolalia to identify if it is self-soothing and when it's happening during the day?
No, we haven't mapped it out. It's just like mentioned when it happens throughout the day.
Got it. Something that I did made for myself, because I experienced a lot of kids when I worked at that school who needed a lot of the echolalia for self-regulating. And maybe I can share it with Chris to send you guys to use if you want it, but it's a data tracking chart that I made that gives a quick little description of the type of echolalia, what it looks like, and then a way for providers and teachers to easily be able to track when it's happening and what it is. And then that way, it kind of gives you a good bird's eye view for, oh, like we're using echolalia in a lot of different ways. And then from there, being able to think about, like, if they're needing that type of self-soothing and self-regulation, what are some ways maybe before this time period of the day where we can add other regulating experiences for them so that they might not feel like they need to rely solely on their scripting for that need, so that they can be in a place where they feel regulated for the learning experience before they get there, and then they are relying on those scripts for self-regulation. Just food for thought, but I'll be happy to share that with you guys. And gosh, any other thoughts on that? Do you have any other ideas?
I appreciate that, because I think that does provide a different perspective. But if anyone else has any thoughts, it can be pretty tricky for the team, because the Gestalt is or the script, I guess I wouldn't necessarily call it a Gestalt right now. The script is so long that it's kind of interfering, and I'm like, oh, I don't want to shut it down. So what do we do?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great way to look at it. Is, you want to validate whether it is for communication or not. Like, it deserves to be validated. But yeah, I think once you kind of chart it out and really map it out, you can start to think about what are some, like, maybe environmental considerations or sensory integration considerations we can think about incorporating.
I love that. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Does anyone else have any thoughts on that question, or things that you've tried that worked well? No one yet. Does anyone else have any questions or want to share about something that you've tried since the last trainings that worked well for you and in the population that you work with?
Hi, sorry, this is for Britt. I was just wondering, I had a thought. Britt, have you ever tried offering any other type of sensory regulation items, like weighted blankets and sensory toys and things, while they're in that script, and maybe just seeing if another support will help them to end that script and almost like move on to another sensory tool? I don't know, has that been tried?
Well, it's kind of funny that this is kind of mentioned now, because one of the times it happens is when the student gets a motor break and they're swinging. And I'm wondering if that's not necessarily as regulating as we think. And then maybe it's amping her up in a way, and we need to kind of do something different. So I think like having a map of, like, when is it happening? What is being said, when is it happening, will help us identify, like, is it in these moments where we need to do some other sensory regulation strategies? So it's making me think about it differently.
Okay, cool. Just had that thought and thought I would share.
Yeah, thank you.
And then it also raises the question too of, like, I have a lot of kids where when they come to my clinic space, we get to hear all of their self-generative, communicative gestalts when they are swinging, climbing, pushing, pulling. And a lot of the times when they're engaging in those physical activities, they're just able to access speech and language so much more efficiently. I'm curious, just to kind of snowball off of that, could be sensory integration related, right? But have you guys been able to trace the source of the gestalts or get parent feedback on that? Yeah.
Yeah, it's all scripts from a TV show. It's like the whole, and maybe like a huge part of the segment.
Got it. And that also makes me want to know too, do you, like, having watched have you guys watched the segment and maybe gleaned what that communicative intent behind it might be?
Is happening within that segment. Yeah, I think that's something we have to explore as well.
Yeah, that might be worth exploring, because sometimes I get Gestalt Language Processors where they do have very long gestalts. I had one client where it was almost like he had to fast forward through a whole part to get to the part he wanted to share. out loud, and we could just hear the change in his tone. And so I know I've heard that quite a bit too, just in some study groups that I'm in, where they do the whole chunk, but maybe it's only the part at the end or the part in the middle that for them is communicative. But that definitely is a lot to kind of think about and slice through when you're sorting that out too.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a couple things, ideas now.
Yay, yay, I'm
Thank
glad.
you.
Well, thanks for
Thank
sharing
you
that.
all.
I appreciate it. Who else has any thoughts from the past trainings or questions?
I have a question. This is Lisa
Sure.
Peterson. I work with older kids that are high school and transition 18 to 21. And so I have a student that I think is a Gestalt language learner, but now we're talking about an 18 to 21-year-old who's had all sorts of speech therapy in different directions. And just trying to find, I mean, she's not playing, she's kind of doing job training and things like that, daily living kinds of skills. Trying to find gestalts that fit in to that environment has been a little trickier than like when I'm working with younger kids.
And I'm curious, you bring up such a great point in question, because you will find inevitably that when you do have an adult that you're working with who's a Gestalt language processor, they are getting pulled in so many different directions with their therapy that might look or reflect more of the analytic language processing style. And they've come so far without being fully validated in that Gestalt language processing style. And that's definitely, I work a lot with kids and pediatric populations, but I haven't had much experience working with young adults yet who are Gestalt language processors. And so I'm learning a lot about this too. I guess my first question to that would be, do you happen to know what stage of that natural language acquisition they might be in?
I think she'd be in the pretty early stages still. Like she's got a communication device, but she speaks as much as she uses that. Like she uses both things. Like things that she likes to say are like, see you later, alligator, after a while, crocodile. And like she'll go through that whole thing. And on her device, she'll, I think some of this might be soothing too, but she'll pick like sentences that she says over and over whenever the device is. She has to kind of get through them before she does anything new. So like she'll be like, drink chocolate milk, eat pizza. And that's what she'll put on her Nova chat. So that's kind of where she is. When she talks, it's usually it just seems like a reflex more than like I'm trying to put a sentence together. So
Like automatic.
yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's a big characteristic of Gestalt processors, is that it's very, like, the automaticity of the language is there, and it will just come out when that experience feels right for using it. I guess, what I would do, I had a situation where I was working with a slightly older child
Mhm.
who was a Gestalt language processor and AAC user, also hyperlexic. But he was technically late identified. And one thing that I had to do was really kind of go back and ask his mom about his past linguistic history in those very young stages where, he had a ton of gestalts that he would type into his device over and over and over and over again. And feeling okay and going back and exploring that with him. So like, for example, when he was really frustrated and mad because he couldn't go outside, it was snowing, I had modeled on the device, I'll huff and puff and blow this house away, from something that we know he was still kind of into and that he used quite a bit when he was a child. And when he heard that in that moment, he came in running over, just kind of pinched my face with excitement and started pressing it over and over again, like as a way, like, oh my gosh, that was like the first time someone like that, like used language in a way that made sense for me. And, that might be worth some, exploring with these older individuals, but also at the same time, respecting that boundary of you're an adult now. And you know what, those phrases and things that you used to use might not be like motivating or inspiring for you anymore. And it definitely is kind of that fine line of discovering that, but also knowing it's okay to go back to those very early type of strategies. Something else you mentioned on the job training. Are you familiar with the Go Visual app?
I don't think so. No.
It's really cool. It was really helpful for a few people I've worked with where it's it costs money, but it's worth it, and it's not too much. But you basically can record a video of the user at the job site or someone else doing the tasks, and you can program in little hotspots. Like you can make a circular, draw your own little button and record either like a gestalt about that experience or the directions for that experience, and then they tap on it, it speaks it out loud for them, and then it continues to play the video. So it's giving them like the auditory and the visual information to help with those different tasks. Might be worth checking out. And you can be creative with Gestalts you might want to add to it.
What's it called again? Go Visual?
Yeah, Go
Go
Visual.
Visual. Okay. All right, we'll check it out. Thank you.
Yeah.
So Kiva, you do have a question in the chat.
Oh, sure.
Well, comment, question. What are your thoughts on acknowledging the script by responding with a statement about their state of being?
So if it's a state of being or something else that they've said, I will always recast their script. And then, especially when it does come to feelings and states and emotions, I might feed and model another naturalistic sounding gestalt that relates to that experience to help bridge those two. But yeah, absolutely, especially for those states and feelings. But I think it's also important to make sure that you can validate their script by using the original message that they self-generated and keeping the integrity of it with their same prosody too. What are your thoughts? Anyone else have thoughts on that?
Well, I had something else when Brittany was talking. Has anybody used the website getyarn.io? It's a website that has like clips from like movies, TV shows, cartoons, or whatever, and you can type in your kid's Gestalt and watch that section of the cartoon or movie or whatever. So then you're not like having to watch a whole 2-hour movie to find, what Scrat said in Ice Age or whatever. It'll pull it up and then you can kind of figure out what it could mean.
Yeah, I love that idea, Heather. There's a few of those generators out there that help you get to the source of where it came from. That's a great idea.
Can you type that website in the chat?
Was it the Go Yarn, Heather? It looks like you might be frozen. Let's see. Heather, if you're able to drop that one in the chat, that would be awesome. There it is. Awesome. Does anyone else have questions or things they'd like to share? What are some new things that you may have tried with your students or in the classroom to support the Gestalt Language Processors that you know? Oh, Gwen, I see you have a question.
Hi, yeah. I work with mostly high school age non-speaking kids. And a couple of them, like looking at their language, talking to their parents and thinking about their language history, they really seem like Gestalt language processors. And they're very interested in watching clips, you know, the same types of clips over and over again. So what I've been trying to do, which to limited success, because I think they're also from a background where they're, you know, Gestalts have not been acknowledged, or really nobody's really tried to use those communicatively with them. I've been trying to record, like help them record them on their AAC devices, but I'm really not sure what to do next, or even whether they are Gestalts. And sometimes I also think, are they more interested in the visual aspects of the clips they're watching than the, you know, than the language? Or it's really hard to decipher sometimes. So do you have any tips on that?
Yeah, I'm curious, could you give me a specific example?
Yeah, there's a scene from Peppa Pig that one kid is he's always got it loaded on the bar across the top of his computer, and he watches this one little clip from Peppa Pig where there's a dinosaur kind of oh, I can't even remember what he says, something about food. I need to go back, it's been a while since we've visited that one, but kind of a robotic sounding dinosaur that so just trying to figure out like what is the meaning has been difficult, and then trying to show him that he can use it communicatively. And like you said, I don't want to force it. I don't want him to, like, if it's not sticking, I'm not trying too hard to push it as something he uses, but I'm just having a hard time getting past the first step of, like, you know, introducing these as a way that we can have some back and forth. He's very used
Yeah,
to just doing it independently. So
yeah, gosh, I would love to know, I guess, like what the message is that he is so gravitated towards, and then what that visual experience is giving him too. But also, and you had mentioned this is something that he uses quite a bit, like on his own when he's pulling it up on the internet, like with the windows.
yeah.
And I'm curious, when is he usually doing that? Is it when he has kind of just his alone time for self-regulating, or
Yeah,
does he ever
anytime he
pull
has.
it up?
No, it's pretty much, you know, when he has break time and he pulls up his computer and watches YouTube clips of all these things he's interested in. So
Got it. And I'm curious, have you explored programming in the audio too? Or did you just start with the visual and the audio?
yes, I did the visual and audio just in a button on his, I think he's on Perlico Go. We added some buttons for him and showed them, and and he thought they were cool, but then he hasn't really used them since. So
Yeah, got it. And the other thing too that might be worth exploring is, for a lot of my kids, they have a mix of like original media on their devices of those gestalts that are communicative. But we tend to know that they're communicative based on how they use it with their mom and dad at home or in session. Like if we're in the middle of, playing with our rocket ship, and then they go turn the TV on and they want to listen to the countdown song in the background, and it's kind of bridging it to that experience. And that's kind of been a way that we've been able to help discern if it's for the self-regulation versus Gestalt language processing. I'm curious though, my next question is, how long have you tried modeling what seems like some of those self-chosen scripts or language chunks?
well, we've revisited it for probably a couple months now, but I'm, such a small piece in his world, and I'm the only one doing it. So it probably more people could try, or show that they're aware of them anyway.
Like to get some more of that redundancy in.
Mhm.
And other thoughts too is, by chance, have you guys programmed in any other naturalistic gestalts based on their interests?
No, I should spend, no, I should
I
do
think
that.
that might be really powerful. Because some of my kids, and I had mentioned the one who was slightly older, when I was modeling that gestalt of the I'll huff and puff and blow this house away, yeah, that actually fit that meaning for him. But he also tended to mostly use some of those media more for the self-regulating and self-soothing, and so he didn't have very much media on his device, like from those original sources. And I think part of it is probably because he was much older now and kind of outgrew those clips that he used to be watching. But he only had very few, and what we ended up doing was added whole chunks of like naturalistic language into different pages of his device. For example, he loved to write and like doodle and draw. So on the whiteboard page of his device, where we're allowed to do that in his language organization, I have programmed some just naturalistic language chunks that kind of fit that interest of his, like, let's make something, let's do, and being able to just cycle that into that experience, but thinking about what are some naturalistic phrases that you think, oh gosh, he loves to swing, or he loves this, like what are some whole melodically rich chunks we can add to his device that cater to this interest of his, and see how that goes. It doesn't always, media is great for some Gestalt language processors, but a lot of the time it's also not always communicative at the same time.
That's a great suggestion. Do you just use your own voice to record those in?
You can, although whenever I'm given the option, I like to ask them whose voice they might like to use, whether that means they can point out a picture, or if they've got like siblings in the home or a parent that they would prefer to have on there. But yeah, that way you can really add and give that prosody behind it too.
Mhm. Okay. Yeah, that's a great suggestion. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Does anyone else here have any other ideas or thoughts on that? How about any new questions or things that you guys have been thinking about as you implement strategies to support your Gestalt language processors? Oh, Andrea, I see you have your hand raised.
Yes, hi. I have a question. I work with a student that is minimally speaking, so I'm starting to introduce robust AAC, a communication app. But one of the things that they do often, and quite clearly actually, they will ask questions about things that they're interested in. So it will be something like, who is, and then they'll say like a singer's name that they know. And then we're supposed to answer, it's a singer, right? Or so-and-so is a singer. Or where do you see so-and-so? And then again, we're supposed to answer. And these are kind of questions that happen often. And then the other thing that they do is they will say something like, you live in, and then I would say, which city I live in. But again, we've done this, like they know the answers to these questions, I suppose. And I find maybe it's a way for them to connect with other people, because otherwise they're not really using language for or verbal speech for other things. So I'm just wondering how to incorporate that maybe into their AC system, and then also how to maybe start thinking about some other questions they could ask or other ways they could interact with people rather than kind of asking these same questions. And this is like a teenager, and they're, I would say they haven't received any kind of therapy in terms of kind of with GLP principles in mind, and they would probably be a kind of like stage, I would say stage 1.
Got it. Yeah, so let me kind of, those really good questions. I want to make sure I can catch them all. And if you could give some clarification too, I'm curious, were these questions that they asked utterances that like throughout their life they have self-generated the use of, or were these taught or bombarded questions, maybe with the intent of teaching like social turn taking? Like, what is that looking like as far as how they acquired those questions that they like to ask people?
I haven't really asked too much about that. I'm not sure if it was taught to them, but I think they do see it as a way to connect with others because other people would then answer them, and there's that turn taking piece there. I have seen other people in the student's life do like a, you're going to, and then the student would have to say where they're going. So they'll do that kind of closing a sentence, like fill in a blank type of a thing. So I've seen other people do that with the students. So now the student also does it with people too.
Yeah, so it does, it does make me wonder, if they were taught those types of things too. It makes me wonder if maybe they are using those maybe they were at one point taught or bombarded utterances, but now, just because of how much time has passed and how they've been reinforced, it has become something that they're using for that connection piece with other people. And I'm curious, are there any other, you said that they're using the device to ask these questions?
No, they actually, no, this is like verbal. Yeah. But aside from that, the other verbal speech is very like unintelligible, or maybe there's like a word here or there.
Got it. Yeah. Are there any other phrases or things that they are using with speech or on their device? Like, how are they interacting with the language on the device?
They've shared how they're feeling once with me, which was really cool on using the device. But aside from that, it's just kind of in the early stages. And I haven't, any other phrases, the few that I've heard have been quite unintelligible. Yeah, so I'm still kind of figuring that out.
Sure. Yeah, I guess what I would love to know is being able to kind of trace where or when, like their intrinsic motivation around those phrases came from. And then I guess, do you guys use those questions as a way to communicate and connect with them too? Like, are you guys initiating the use of them?
I'm not, but I have seen other people around the student do that. Yes.
Because that, if that's something that they're self-initiating as a way to connect, we had mentioned in some of the previous slides that it's okay for us to, speak the language of our clients by using some of those gestalts that they're using. And that's how you really can show them like the redundancy and of how those can be used across contexts and with different activities. For example, one of my clients picked up on, she really loved the gestalt of "Where are you?" From the Finger Family song. But when I'm playing with her and we're just connecting non-verbally and just having fun with our, playing with a rocket ship, for example, or with mini objects, I'm then modeling, acting like, oh my gosh, it got lost, and I'm modeling, where are you? While the rocket ship blasted off and hid behind the sofa, and I'm going to get it, and I'm modeling, where are you? And so, if your client is asking questions like, where do you live? You might, and if it seems like the intent behind that is genuinely like the location for where something is, you might cycle that into play with them. When you go, you know, like let's say you lost your keys, you go, oh, keys, where do you live? And you might go look for them. You're validating their self-chosen language. It doesn't, in the early stages of Gestalt language processing, especially if you haven't been validated yet in that processing style, the best thing you can do is use their gestalts and keep the integrity of their gestalts the same without correcting the syntax based on the moment. The one day they get there, that's the goal, but you have to start in a way that language processing wise, they are able to understand. But that might be worth, you know, kind of exploring, how can I use some of these questions that they like to ask in a way outside of just this one rote back and forth way that we're connecting. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes, it does.
Do
Yeah.
you think that that might help? Or do you have questions or concerns with that?
No, I think it would. And I think I just have to be like writing some of that down myself. I think maybe getting a good language sample would be helpful. Yeah.
Absolutely. You know, something I started doing a lot more of recently, even since the last time I presented with you guys, was I have a shared drive for a lot of my Gestalt language processors where I have like a chart where I've mapped out, here's the Gestalt, here's where it came from, here's the communicative function behind it. And there's an extra little comments box where people are like the parents and the other providers are able to access it and insert their own comments of how it's being used with them. And it's kind of nice to augment just all that collaboration, because it's a lot. If it feels like a one-man job to have to sort through and determine how it's being used, but that's something that's worked well for me so far, and it's something I just recently started doing.
No, that sounds great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Those were great questions. Does anyone else have any thoughts on that question from Andrea, or any questions for yourselves?
I was just gonna say that a lot of the AAC devices already have like a chat folder, and it has a lot of those interaction things. Hi, how are you? I'm good. And then a lot of them also have like games so that you can get in there and play Go Fish or Trouble or Sorry. And a lot of those have assaults that you can model and interact with those students with.
That's a fun idea. I like that, Heather.
I would add to that using the strategy of acknowledging kind of the gestalt that they hung on to, and then modeling from there has been a strategy that I've seen work. I had a kiddo who really loved, that's not a bug. I don't even remember when I said it or what, but she would echo that, and then I took that and say, that's not a bug, that's not a, and just try my best to use a negative statement to then model some language, and she picked up on those as well, and I saw her mitigating using that's not a, but you know, I acknowledge first that, oh, she picked up this, you know, whenever I used it, and then tried to generalize to other environments as well.
That's fantastic. I love that that worked so well. Thanks for sharing, Charity. Anyone else have any other questions? We have about 1 minute left.
I do have a question on, and I'll try to make it quick.
Sure.
I have a student who I've tried, I think, every toy and every item that I have in my room, and nothing is interesting, as well as sensory motor movement, swinging, jumping, crashing. The one thing he's connected to is swinging. But I think I've exhausted my ability to model language with only swinging. Do you have any suggestions of other things I can try that he might be interested in, and that we could share a connection with?
Yeah, I'm curious, do you know, have his parents been able to share what he enjoys doing at home?
It's mostly watching videos or watching songs over and over and over again, but other activities, like, not really. And yeah, we both kind of come up against the same thing. There's not much he enjoys outside of videos and songs.
Sure. Do you guys like to watch videos and songs together?
We've done that, but he doesn't like to share the experience. And so I don't know how to kind of use that time for therapy. It's an individual experience for him.
Sure. I'm like, that's for him is very personal, and that's his time for him to kind of get that alone time for himself, it sounds like.
Yeah, that's what I've seen. And so I'm not sure what to do with that or how to use it for modeling language.
Sure. Does he, and I'm sorry, what setting is it that you work in?
A school setting.
A school setting? What does his day look like? Are there parts of the day that he seems to really look forward to, or certain peers that he really likes, that he feels like he has a strong connection with?
iPad time and swinging time. When he goes out to recess, it's straight to the swing. OT, straight to the swing. And if he has any downtime in class, he prefers the iPad.
Sure. And then my next question, does he have a device?
Yes, he does have AAC device. He has very limited verbal speech, and AAC has been his main mode of communication since preschool.
What does that look like, as far as how he's interacting with the device and using it?
He received ALP type therapy since preschool, and then I started GLP with him about a year and a half ago. And so I've seen some progress with using Gestalts that are programmed into his Proloco to Go device. Let's go, I'm tired, I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, which he had never previously used on his iPad, on his device. I'm sorry, he had only asked, "I want iPad" for years. And then once we started GLP therapy, that's when I started to see a few more phrases emerge, which I had programmed into his device. But
Got it.
yeah,
No.
any other ideas or anything I'm open to?
I also wonder, like, I would love to know what modeling looked like when you were working with a student. You know, I had one client in my caseload where I really had to spend a lot of time to build connection and mutual understanding. And one strategy that I employed with him was embracing the silence, and just focusing my energy on not modeling language or focusing on gestalts, but focusing on our just doing the same thing together and just existing together, and being really intentional with how much language I was modeling and showing during sessions, because he was a person who really enjoyed regulation activities, but without that extra layer of verbal output and or feeling like there was any kind of like verbal expectation or social expectation. So I would say for like, gosh, I would even say 4 months straight. That was me, and the family's focus was, you know, like, we're thinking, obviously we want to support communication and language and help him feel validated as a Gestalt language processor, just knowing his linguistic history and everything, but learning to feel comfortable in the silence and nonverbal communication, using total communication with him. And then, you know, after about just building a few months of building that connection with him, you know, we always, during those sessions, always had the device out. I always had my own device, so I didn't have to model on his. And I think that gave him some of his power back, which was really helpful too. Occasionally I would use my device to model gestalts based on the interesting thing that we were doing together that fit that experience. And then slowly but surely he kind of started to see and understand that he could trust that, and he started using some of them himself. But yeah, I mean, it might be worth, I don't know, maybe you tried it. I'm not too sure, but what are your thoughts so far?
Yeah, I feel like for about a year. That was kind of what I tried. We would go into the OT clinic and I just tried to incorporate movement, and hey, you have the freedom to go and do whatever you want, go try whatever equipment you want, because it was usually more like, okay, you have 10 minutes, go to the swing, and then we're going back to class. And that was kind of how regulatory time was structured for him previously. So I was like, well, I know this is something you enjoy, go do it, go have fun with it. And then I would kind of sit to the side and model on my device or on his device if he dropped it. And I felt like that did help us build a connection that past year. But I think this year, I've just kind of hit a wall with him. He's more in tune to the swing and by himself, and he's kind of forgotten that I'm there. And I'm like, hey, I'm still here. So yeah, it's just a hard one. But I think too, this year in my attempt to model language and see more growth from him, I'm modeling maybe too much language during the session. Whereas previously, the last year, there was a lot more times of quiet, and we're just gonna sit here together, So I think that's a good suggestion.
Yeah, and I think it's always okay to give ourselves permission to kind of go back to that when it's needed. And we all know it too, that connection piece is like the foundation. And that will always take the priority. But yeah, I appreciate you sharing all that. Thank you. All right, well, I appreciate you guys for coming and hanging out with us today. Maybe I'll see you at the CATE conference too.
Well, thank you, Kieva. This has been fantastic. So much sharing and brainstorming and problem solving. So nice to kind of dive deep into some of these issues.
Yeah, I appreciate everyone for sharing their experiences so far. I really do. Thank you.